Falls are consistently the leading cause of injury-producing accidents. They account for more than 1 million injuries each year in the United States. What is the cause of so many of these falls? In a great majority of cases, dangerous and hazardous conditions. Dangerous conditions such as torn carpeting, changes in flooring, poor lighting, narrow stairs, or a wet floor can cause someone to slip and hurt themselves inside a building. Other instances of slip and fall accidents can occur when people trip on broken or cracked public sidewalks or trip and fall on stairs or escalators. In addition, a slip and fall case might arise when someone slips or trips and falls because of rain, ice, snow, or a hidden hazard, such as a pothole in the ground. There is no precise way to determine when someone else is legally responsible for your injuries if you slip or trip or fall. Each case turns on whether the property owner acted carefully so that slipping or tripping was not likely to happen, and whether you were careless in not seeing or avoiding the condition that caused the accident. Today, the Justice in America Network TV series goes behind the headlines in this new network TV special, Justice in America, Pamela Mackie's story, and how Massachusetts trial lawyer Joe Borsellino at Joseph Borsellino Law got justice for his client Pam Matckie after she slipped and fell at the New England Patriots Gillette Stadium on June 26, 2010. When the craft businesses, the event owners and operators of the Great American Food Festival forced food tent users to walk on the dangerous boards throughout the event, Pam's arm was so severely injured, her surgeon testified that she suffered a complex humerus fracture. It was later proven in court that Kraft took shortcuts when it came to safety in this event, which is why the jury entered a resounding verdict for Pam of $450,000 plus interest, totaling $670,298. Today we will meet with Joe and some of Pam's dearest friends to discuss the case and remember her for the wonderful, caring, hardworking, talented chef that she was. It was her dying wish that Joe and her friends tell her story, which is why our news team is on location today in Boston, Massachusetts. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Boston. It is my great pleasure to introduce Joe Borsellino to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be here.
We're here today to talk about a case, Pamela Matckie, which you put your heart and soul into. And I've noticed in reviewing a lot of the cases that you do that with almost every case. You are what we call a plaintiff's lawyer. You fight for the underdog, right?
That's a fair way of saying, yeah.
Why do you do that?
I feel that for my clients that I will stand with them the same way I want somebody to stand with me. And I've been imbued with the sense of justice since I was a child, that every voice should be as strong as another, and nobody should be subjected to being treated as less, receiving less, or being deprived because somebody else is bigger and more powerful and more wealthy. It's been with me since I was a child.
What were your clients, Pam Mackie's dying words?
Pam Matckie, in her last breaths, said, "Please tell my story."
And that's why we're here today. So let's tell her story. Who was she and what happened to her?
So Pam was a beautiful, simple, down-to-earth, loving, kind human being. She had suffered a lot of hardship in life. Both of her parents had passed. Her brother had passed, and her aunt was her last close family member who had provided for her employment through her life. Pam loved to cook. Her father was a chef at MIT for 25 years, and they would call Pam Chefette, and they would call her father Chef. And since she was a little girl, she would go with her father and shop and walk around the Haymarket, prepare food for the needy at Thanksgiving, prepare food for people in the neighborhood. He was from Puerto Rico, And she had such a richness in her personality and in her food. She was asked to go volunteer for no pay at Gillette Stadium. Gillette Stadium was hosting the American Food Festival, which was being billed as a national festival that would come back year after year, with Paula Deen and the Neelys, American Idol stars, and people were going to come and flood to Gillette Stadium, which was going to be the premier center to host this international food event. And Pam, along with 50 other students, were the labor. And Pam drove the students. She was so excited. She was going to use the experience to help bolster her education, and she loved the Patriots and she loved Gillette Stadium. And this was going to be a highlight event for her as she was a student at Le Cordon Bleu. So in Pam's story, this was a realization of a dream. She stopped doing the headhunting. Her aunt had cancer and was reaching end of life herself. She wanted to make her proud, and she wanted to do something that was always her dream. She went to Le Cordon Bleu, and she excelled in food scientists and international cuisine and wine and beverages, in pastries and baking. She graduated high honors. And this happened to her before her graduation. She went there to volunteer and found the most despicable and disgraceful environment to work in that you can imagine at a so-called premier location. To put it in a nutshell, the entire stadium perimeter was carpeted with boards that were no better than trash. They were warped, they were cracked, they had been left outside 365 days a year. They'd been driven on by cranes, by forklifts, and the idea was to protect the Patriots football field.
And when they have other events in Gillette Stadium, they put down another type of material.
Yes, they do. They had it, at that time they called it Terraplast. Today they'll call it rhino coverage or turf.
It still protects the turf.
Protects the turf. It's safe to walk on. It's flat. It doesn't have any of the hazards, but it costs money.
Right. So the Kraft businesses, which owns the Gillette Stadium.
The Kraft Group is the parent company, and Gillette Stadium is called NPS, New Patriot.
We're trying to cut corners here.
Absolutely. They're taking the cheapest route.
So they used this old board.
They required it. The contractors were not allowed to use anything but board.
And what happened was, in helping out, volunteering at Gillette Stadium, Pam tripped.
She had a terrible fall. Her foot was swallowed up into a large warped area, and she outstretched her arm to break her fall. She ended up cracking the ball off the socket of her humerus, breaking it cleanly and into 4 different pieces, and then breaking the humerus into multiple additional fragments.
She went to the hospital for this eventually.
So she went to the hospital, and she had to have multiple surgeries. There were 3 surgeries in all.
Who's paying for these surgeries?
This had to be done with whatever insurance she had through the school at Le Cordon Bleu and whatever else she could deal with on a private basis. The medical bills totaled over $60,000. And as I said, she was a student, and she had no financial support from anybody outside, and had given all the money she had to commit to a $30,000 tuition at Le Cordon Bleu.
So obviously the fault is, this is what we call a premises liability case. The fault is with the people who created the dangerous premises.
Absolutely.
And that happened to be the Kraft businesses which put on the event, which owned the stadium, correct?
So the Kraft businesses were found to be 2 of the 3 faulty parties, the owners of the stadium themselves and the security operation that failed to do anything to remedy. Also the production manager. And this production manager, for context, has worked with the Kraft Industries for 15 years. Almost all of its business is the Krafts. He maintains his own trailer on the Kraft's property during seasonal entertainment events. So this is a very close-knit group of people.
Now, it would seem to anybody whose fault it is, I mean, it seems to be the Kraft businesses, the owner, the operators, the production manager, etc. But it took you, in representing Pam, 6 long years to actually bring this case to a resolution. Why did it take so long, and what were the challenges and the problems that the opposing counsel put up?
Okay, so strategically, the plan was to get Pam to take a very small amount of money, to lowball her, and to live in deprivation for most of her life and give her a tiny fraction of what she should have had. And when that didn't work and litigation had to be filed, the court wasn't happy about it either because, as you say, it was such an obvious case of such a traumatic injury. The court ordered the case to go to mediation. On the eve of the mediation, the Kraft defendants started to point the finger at new parties and contend that the fault of this whole event was people other than themselves.
Okay, but let me stop you here so our audience understands this. You have a mediation date set?
Mediation was set for September.
Okay, you now have opposing counsel saying it's not their fault, it's other people's fault.
Correct.
Still, you have to go to mediation, and you don't.
Pulled out of mediation.
They voluntarily pulled out?
Yes.
Okay, well, why did it go to mediation in the first place? The court ordered that?
To get this settled in due course so that Miss Matckie could be made whole and get on with her life.
You eventually ended up going to trial.
We eventually ended up going to trial. What ended up happening, Steve, is that additional 4 parties, each time they pointed the finger at somebody else who was never before named. We then had to implead and start the litigation all over against the maintenance company.
Yeah, and this is a tactic that well-heeled, well-financed law firms use all the time because they're trying to bury and drown the smaller practitioner like yourself, right? So that you get disheartened in continuing and settle the case for next to nothing.
While the plaintiff, I should say, goes without food and shelter and in a manageable way, Pam ended up becoming homeless by the 5th year. She ended up having her dogs kept in kennels and her pets, and she bartered her labor to keep them alive. She was only able to work as a nanny and a part-time chef in families because she couldn't lift pots anymore. She couldn't bend and lift things from the ground. She'd lost the dexterity and ability to use her fingers and hands as a chef, and was tested by a vocational expert as well as by an orthopedic surgeon at one of the major hospitals in Boston. Both of them said she would never be able to do the work of a commercial chef in a commercial kitchen without being a danger to herself and others with heavy objects, sharp knives, etc.
So you went to trial. What happened?
We went to trial. So all of the testimony that was relevant to the trial came out, and all of the stories and story changes came out. The defendants tried to repress that as well, to not be able to tell the jury how they kept changing the story, and the judge wasn't having it. The judge says, if you're going to behave like this, your testimony is not going to be treated like pixie dust. The jury's going to know for credibility evaluations how you kept changing and pointing to somebody else. That was very, very helpful. And it was also helpful to know that in the course of the litigation, which was very expensive to finance, it turned out that all of the responsible parties that had all the information that was relevant were working in the same building. The maintenance people were 1 minute from where the incident happened. The production manager was on the computers and the communication systems with the Kraft group. None of those people were interviewed. Not the maintenance person, not the vendors, not the security people, not the field superintendent. Pam was ignored. For over 2 years, nobody cared to do anything. And not only did she not receive an apology and acknowledgement, the films of the event, there were 4 cameras that scoped the field. The film was gone. No preservation of the film.
They destroyed evidence.
Their contention was, we don't know what happened to it. We didn't look at it. We didn't save it. We didn't preserve it. But you just had an ambulance remove a person with a massively deformed arm, and you didn't preserve the evidence, and you didn't take a single picture of the scene, of the boards. All the evidence was gone. The only thing I was able to recover was a report from the security team that said This is a hazard. And this hazard has to be removed before people get hurt.
Right. When the trial was over and it went to the jury, how long was the jury out?
The jury was out for a fairly good amount of time, which was comforting to me because, you know, I interpreted that as they're going to decide how to compensate her. They were restrained because Pam died before the trial happened.
As a result of these injuries?
Well, we didn't have any medical testimony to establish that, but we could show, but we were not allowed to present it without medical testimony, is the decline in her existence leading up to homelessness. She was living in the back seat of a Chevrolet Spark, and she was becoming a shadow of the person she was. I moved to take her deposition because I knew she was going to die. The hospital said that her condition is so dire that we cannot guarantee her competency for 24 hours. And you must have her testify now because she will not be able to or she'll be dead. This led to another maneuver, and this one came through the production manager. They opposed agreeing to a videotape deposition and wanted to subject it to motion challenge in practice, with the obvious implication that she'll be dead before the court ever has a chance to hear it. So I had to rush into the courthouse and find a judge from another session to cause them to come in after Thanksgiving and have an order requiring them to go up to the hospital and take her deposition. And there she was on her last moments of life.
And that's when she said, I want you to tell my story. You've got to.
She did. And she also said, don't sell me out, and don't take an unfair offer and let them benefit by what they've done.
What was the final verdict?
So the final verdict, for the limited time, they were only allowed to award damages up until she died. So they awarded $450,000 just for that period of time, to which was added statutory interest, which came to almost $700,000. But the interest on the verdict was almost $50,000 more than they had ever offered starting from day one, just the interest.
6-year struggle. You did a really good job, and you know, it's lucky she had a lawyer like you. We have with us today some of her friends, and we're going to bring them on right now since she can't be here, so they can tell a little bit about her, okay?
Yes, that's great. I know these people they came to the trial, they sat through the trial, and they loved her like her own.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Cindy McCarthy and Michelle Terry David to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for being here, because you were Pam's good friends, right? Tell us, you know, what was your friendship with her?
I met Pam through Cindy and ended up living very close to her, sort of by accident. And we spent, God, we used to walk our dogs together. We would go on long walks in the Arboretum. Every year we would get together and bake Christmas cookies. Cindy had a tradition of doing Stitch and Bitch, where we'd gather at Cindy's house and bring a bottle of wine, and we would make crafts. One year it was homemade Christmas cards. Mm-hmm. One year it was little wreaths. I don't know. So Pam was always a really important part of that, and we just loved being together.
And what about yourself there?
We met when she was about 17 to 18, and I kind of came in as a mother figure for her. Her family was kind of doing their own things in the world, and she and I just bonded right from the get-go, and we did a lot of things together. I got my hands on a lot of different businesses, fan mail for public, big bands, and she wanted to know some of these bands. So we hung out together, and I took her to shows with the bands. And we did a lot of theater work together. Was something that we did for about 10 years together. My children, my friend Mitch, and a lot of our friends were all part of the theater production together.
Right. Now, Joe mentioned earlier that when she was down on her luck, she was living in her car for a while. But I understand that you guys, both of you, took her in for a while but she had a lot of pride, didn't want to be taking advantage of people, well, the way she saw it, right? Tell our audience a little bit about that.
It was really important to Pam to sort of live life on her own terms. When she became homeless, one of the things that broke her heart was having to board her cats and her 2 dogs. It was vitally important to her that they be taken care of. Mm-hmm. They came before she did. She didn't want to live off of someone, so she stayed with some other friends for a couple weeks. She stayed with Cindy for a little while. She stayed with me. Ultimately, she wouldn't come in the house, but I let her park her car in my driveway so that she had a place off the street. There were lights and it was safe. And then she would come in and shower, and I kept food in the house that she liked.
This is for both of you. She's no longer here. What do you think she would say about you guys speaking up for her?
This is what she wants her story told and heard. There's other people that have been treated just as poorly, and she did not want this to just be swept under the carpet like some people would like it to be.
As you've seen, this case took 6 years, right? And you know, the craft businesses, Gillette Stadium, supposed to be the pride of Foxborough, Massachusetts, whatever. You have also seen a side of a defendant who does everything in their power to deny accountability and compensate someone for something they caused, right? What do you think about the job that Joe did representing her?
What the defendant did was so ugly, and Pam would call and tell us different things. You mentioned, Joe had mentioned something happening right at Thanksgiving time. That wasn't the only time. They waited until, 2 minutes before the courts were going to close for the day to file some sort of thing so that Joe would have to stay late, not be with his family, do things. And Pam was horrified by this. I mean, she was just, not a naive person, but I think it was hard for any of us to believe that somebody could treat other people in this just horrendous way. Yeah. And Pam, over the 6 years, she never lost her focus on, please tell my story, please get this out there. She didn't want for herself so much as she wanted the people who did this to be held accountable. And Joe was a superhero. Joe just kept going and going and going. It was amazing.
Cindy, what is the story that Pam wanted the world to know about how she was treated in this case?
You can have dreams, do your best to fulfill them and make them come true, and try not to let people who want to squash you do it. Have a good lawyer. She wanted us to know and put the word out there that dreams can come true. She started from nothing. Her daddy was from Puerto Rico. Her mom was a Czechoslovakian lady. They were very ethnic and beautiful people. And she had dreams she built on just from a simple life. And that she was making come true even in the depths of the Depression and as far down as she did end up going before she passed away.
Well, thank both of you for being here, speaking on her behalf. Friendships are everything. They're priceless. We also have your daughter, Asia, who wants to say a few words. So let's bring her on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Asia to the show. Welcome to the show, Asia.
Hey, thanks for having us.
You are Cindy's daughter. Both of you knew Pam real well. Well, what kind of friend was Pam?
I met her when I was very young, maybe 7 or 8. So she was kind of an auntie to start with. Always at the house, always cooking, always having fun, babysitting. And as I grew, she became kind of a sister. And I feel like we kind of grew up together in different ways, from a mother, an auntie type of place to a sister and friends. Friendship that grew out of it.
She must have talked to you a little bit about her case.
Oh, of course. Yes, she stayed with me for quite a long time.
Yeah, and what did she say about how things were going along?
She was scared. It didn't make sense. She believed better.
I think a lot of people think, hey, if it's pretty obvious, they should settle the case, right? And she couldn't work anymore. She couldn't pursue her dream, right? She couldn't lift pots or heavy things, right? So, you know, it was probably very depressing for her, right?
Oh, absolutely. She fell into a very deep depression, but she kept going because she always wanted to do the right thing. So she would never stop working, even if she was in pain. She wouldn't stop working. She added home chef, being a chef in the home, to her resume, kind of, just so she could still cook and be a host, because cooking and feeding people was her joy, was to bring that to other people.
If she was here today, what do you think she'd say about the job that Joe did for her case?
Sorry, I'm speechless on that one. Watching him was unbelievable. In the courtroom every day, Joe feels it in his soul, and I know Pam was just in so much awe of him. And then I wish she got to see him in the courtroom, just so clear as day, explaining why this was so wrong. And I know she'd just be just as proud of Joe as we are, because it was incredible to see him work and go up against the big dogs and fight for the little guy and be so right and so clear against such a terrible wrong.
You're getting that message out, and we appreciate you being on the show. Thank both of you again, okay?
Thanks for having us.
You know, Joe, we see this oftentimes, you know, people walking down the street, they trip, they fall, they injure themselves, or on a private, you know, property, in a home, whatever. If you're injured by someone else's fault on their property, whatever it might be, what is the first thing you should do?
So preservation of evidence is crucial, because the premises are going to change. Whether it's snow, whether it's ice, whether it's replacing a board, you have to record the defect. You have to have witnesses to corroborate your testimony. The injured person is always going to be considered a person of interest, motivated by self-gain. You need to get objective, independent evidence of defects. And in this case, the students at Le Cordon Bleu used their cameras, and they provided the evidence that the defendants did not.
Wow, you know, that was very helpful. There's statute of limitations in a lot of these cases. If you're injured, how long do you have in this state to file a lawsuit against the person or the entity that caused you injury?
In Massachusetts, you have 3 years. There are unique situations. If it's against a government agency, you may have different rules that apply. There may be notice periods less than that. If it's snow and ice, it's even more constricted, because the snow and ice leaves and the defendant has to have notice. So there are regulations that require mandatory notices as well. The general statute is 3 years.
As in Pam's case, you said that the medical bills almost totaled $60,000.
Excess of $60,000.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have that kind of money. Are the hospitals still continue treating them?
Yes.
They do?
Yes, in most cases. Not in all, but in most.
Do you, when a lawsuit is settled or goes to trial and you're paid, do you negotiate with the hospitals to reduce the bill?
In every chance that I have.
Do they do that?
In some cases they do.
What is the reason they do that?
Sometimes it's a humanitarian reason. Sometimes it's a accepted understanding that it took this patient 5 or 6 years to recover funds, and it took the hiring of an attorney and had to pay money to an attorney. And they'll take that into account. And some don't take it into account. Some write it off and find it more advantageous to take it as a loss.
In building your case, in your discovery of evidence, you have often, as in this case, discovered that evidence disappears with no explanation. Legal jargon, that's called spoliation. I would suppose that judges may look upon someone who says, I don't know what happened to the evidence, as a lie. What happens when the opponent lies about what happened? What does the court do?
Yeah, so this was interesting. In this particular case, a judge stated on the record, I cannot countenance what you're telling me. It doesn't ring true. You're coming in here and telling me that several hundred boards were laid across the entire stadium perimeter and not a single person saw one or has any knowledge. What the judge did was to make orders to get around the lack of evidence. In this particular case, the judge ordered them to turn over the contact information of every single employee that was on duty that day. And I had a team of lawyers ready, so as soon as the information was available to me, we got on the telephone and we called as many as we could. And all I needed was to get one, and I did. The concession supervisor that was sitting right front and center came in and verified that all of those boards were already on the ground in a defective condition before anybody was let in that wasn't an in-house person. The very next day, I received notice that the craft organization had told, the stadium itself had told all the employees to not speak to me on any call. And I never had another person answer the phone after that. That was one way of getting around the lack of evidence. In some cases, the judge can order a dismissal or a default. In other cases, they can instruct the jury that you are to find that the reason that information disappeared is because the defendant knew that that information was inculpatory of their liability. I did not get that instruction.
With big verdicts like this, especially against well-known defendants, you probably get contacted by other people who have similar type cases. How do you determine the cases that you want to handle?
I have a very small and selective practice. I have to believe in the person. I have to believe that there's either a loss that can never be regained and damage to that person, or there's a legal issue that needs to be litigated, even if there's comparative fault to go around, some pivotal issue that can affect the legal landscape. Those are really the two things. In Pam's case, everything lined up. Deserving person, extremely at fault party, and would have been broken and crushed had she not been able to level the playing field.
Well, thank God she had you as a lawyer, and thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.